Well, welcome everybody. I'm gonna get in here a little bit. Um, a little bit about me. I got started studying social and community psychology, and our main aim in the research lab that I worked in was civic participation. We were really curious about what got people engaged in their community, why people would take extra time out of their day and step into their community and be part of the change to make things better, versus kind of just passively watching as policy changes, and really looking at how to show up a bit differently. And that little spark has led to a number of different spaces where I've played around with this. I started and operated several yoga studios for almost 10 years, looking at building and creating a sense of community in that context. And ultimately found myself working with starting nonprofits as well as working for nonprofits that have specialized and focused on community building. That brings me into this conversation, which I find to be so exciting. And what makes me so happy and so excited about the conversation is that one of the things that is so beautiful about psychology is that things are often contextually relevant. And so something that works really, really well in one context can not work so well in another context or even be problematic. One of my favorite examples of this, back when I used to teach psychology, was that it's the same heuristic structures, that the shortcuts that our brain uses in order to kind of quickly make sense of a very wild and crazy world and make quick decisions that leads to some of the social problems like racism and sexism and other areas where we don't give kind of the full, complex, nuanced analysis of every new person coming into our lives. But in other contexts, it's those same faculties that allow us to drive and allow us to ride a bike and allow us to do things that that normally we wouldn't be able to do if we were having to consciously process and think through everything. And so in this conversation, we're going to be talking about leadership. And we're going to talk a little bit about two different ways of leadership and the benefits of both of them, and specifically how we can use what's more of a soft leadership style in order to be able to engage in community involvement and a lot of the amazing benefits that come from that shift, from the types of leadership that we're used to seeing, in media, and that we're used to people talking about, and that we're used to people engaging with, or even being taught in schools. And another form of leadership, which is just as effective and just as purposeful, and in some cases, even more effective. We'll get into that. So it's kind of more of like a yin and a yang here, where we've often talked about leadership as this space of a traditional top-down approach where you have people at the top, usually from an organizational level, that are creating direction and vision and structure. And then through that direction and vision and structure, they're kind of creating the road forward for everybody to be making progress on different aims, different goals. And in many traditional businesses, this is an extremely powerful structure that helps maintain focus and make sure that people are goal-oriented, make sure that people aren't getting sidetracked on things that aren't as important, or that there's too many solutions being put out there and not any of them are really being acted on. There's a lot of benefits to having this. And there is this sense of security a lot of times that comes from really strong leadership. There's this place of like, oh, okay, I get to take a breath, I get to relax, I get to just do the thing that I want to do or that I'm being told to do. I don't have to think. And there's something that's really primal and beautiful and wonderful about being able to just show up in a system that's doing what it's doing, that has a clear direction, doing your part in it, and moving on. And we get used to that. And in these businesses, in these contexts, not only do we get used to that, but we begin to think that, great, like the stronger that leadership is, the more direct control, the more clear hierarchy, the more clear understanding, the more that I can just relax into it, the more that I can have almost no idea what's going on and have everything still work out because I did my part and everyone did their part, the better. And, and so we move in this direction of really strong, clear leadership. And if you're just building a business, if you just have a singular aim in mind, that can work really well. But in the context of community, it becomes extremely important to start looking at what is a very, very different style of leadership that often is something that many people wouldn't think of or consider as leadership at all. And that is a softer leadership of where you're focusing on collaboration, you're focusing on shared responsibility, and on significantly more fluid hierarchy. There is actually a really wonderful book called Team of Teams that focuses on some of the strength of things like fluid hierarchy and how in many cases when you have a rapidly changing environment, that these different ways of approaching and showing up in a directed way become stronger when we shift that focus from clear, direct hierarchy and top-down approach to something that's a bit more fluid. However, there's a way to do that. Otherwise, it can feel too fluid and people don't know what to do. And so that's kind of where we're going to get into today. So again, just kind of quick overview here a little bit. Yang leadership principles are what we all know. These are what is the, if you ask, kind of like a typical CEO in the world, what's the direction in? There's a space around, there's a focus on being competitive. There's a focus on being our best, bringing the best market out there, maintaining market share. There's a focus on directed leadership. So directed leadership is like the leadership that we expect. You have your C-suite, you have, people in positions at the top that are overseeing the overall government. You have managers underneath that. You have assistant managers underneath that. Every single role knows the roles ahead of them and kind of where the boundaries are and, what's available, what's not available. And you have very clear boundaries around who's in charge of what and who has the ultimate say in what. They're very goal-oriented. You have specific visions, specific goals in mind. They're very decisive. You can make quick decisions, and you can be able to act on quick decisions and effectively. They are resilient in that they can stay very focused, and there's a strong-willed aspect of being unafraid of entering conflict when needed and kind of just in moving through. And they're typically, at least strongly read by a deep visionary approach, where you have a vision that's being created at the top, and then you're just bringing everybody on board with that vision. And each person that you're bringing on, you're like, okay, we're going to sell you on the vision. We're going to teach you how to sell others on the vision, and we're all going to be on board with this singular vision. And there's a reason why all the examples that I'm kind of leaning towards as I go into this are businesses. And it's because this leadership style is particularly good with business and has some drawbacks when it comes to community engagement. And for all of the introverts and all the people who don't like being at the center and don't like taking responsibility for everything and don't want to be the ones that are, having to organize and oversee everything that's happening, just want to be a part of something, that is something that is really actually beneficial for us when we get into another form of leadership. So here we have more of yin leadership principles. And let me go through this one a little bit slower because we're often less practiced in this space. So where are we collaborative? What being collaborative here means is that we're focusing on teamwork, consensus building, and listening. And one of the things that is most important about this is that community building at its core is something that people have to opt into every day. This is very different than a job. This is very different than, it's the difference between managing employees and organizing with volunteers. There's this space where we're creating environments where people have to opt into it every day. And when we create those types of environments, we also have to understand that we need to be really responsive to what are the emerging needs in that environment. Because if you're building a community, you can't just say, well, what you want isn't part of our vision and mission statement, so you can either stick around with us or you can leave. That is, that only works for so long when trying to do community organizing. And really, really quickly, what ends up happening is that you end up just doing community organizing alone. So at its fundamental core, we need to kind of shift this idea that we can never create the perfect vision. Because I see a lot of times community building, people think, oh, well, if we just really hone in on a really, really cool vision, let's say that's a carbon neutral neighborhood. I did a number of work working with cities towards carbon neutral neighborhoods. Like if we can just really hone in on this idea that we can have a completely self-sustainable carbon neutral neighborhood, then everybody will be on board. Or maybe if we can, really focus on this community garden, and we can really focus on cleaning up the community and getting rid of, people who are just kind of hanging and loitering around, and really make everything beautiful again. If we can all just agree on this vision, then everybody's going to show up, everybody's going to be happy, we're going to make progress. But what really ends up happening in those spaces is that you confront the aspect that in community building, there's so many different issues, and sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. And everybody has their own little soft spot for the causes and the aspects of community that are important to them. And there's no one single vision that can encompass them all. And in order for them to be able to show up every day and choose to show up over and over again, to choose to prioritize over and over again, in order for that to be a possibility for someone, they have to know that there's being consensus, and that there is listening, that there is teamwork, that things can shift for their needs just as much as they shift for others' needs. That's kind of what collaboration focuses on. It makes sure that we really are all in it together. And one of the beautiful parts of this that we'll get into is that actually lessens the load on community leaders that are looking to bring more organized community into it, and it makes it so they don't burn out as quickly when you do this properly. The next thing here, the shift, is servant leadership. And this is really where So what we're doing here is we're leading by supporting individual ambitions in the community, in everybody that's there. And actually, at the very end of this, we'll do a quick little breakout exercise that focuses on the skill of servant leadership, because I think that it is perhaps the most powerful of the different types of skill sets that can work with and it can be used in community building. Um, it is a space where our main focus as a leader transitions from I'm going to hold this big vision, and in this big vision, I'm going to then adopt everyone into it. And it transitions from that vantage point to a vantage point of how can I just take a little bit of time out of my day over the course of weeks or months and talk to and get to know the people that I'm engaging with and discover what is their why? Why are they here? Why would they want to be engaged with the community? What have they really enjoyed? What has been really problematic for them? What are the areas in which they like to lead? What are the skill sets that they would love to bring into their community? What is their ambition? If they created some big vision for their community, what would that look like? What would be there? What would be missing? And so it's this shift of selling people on a vision to, and this assumption that there's even a collective vision at all, into taking time and recognizing and listening into how is there a way that I, as a leader, can, in small ways, either through just being a cheerleader on the side, being like, well, that's such a cool idea, go do it, all the way to like actually supporting it. Is there ways that I can tangibly show up for you to support this, to really discover each and every person's, or at least, obviously the big communities, you can't reach everybody, but creating a culture where we are all constantly discovering each and every person's ambitions and objectives and goals and seeing how we can co-support each other in these many varied and different approaches to creating life, creating sustainability, creating community, and what that looks like and what that feels like for each person. This is where it kind of comes into this empathizing, where we're prioritizing emotional intelligence, understanding, and supporting people in the community over skills and over the idea that we just kind of need to be really efficient. Sometimes the most efficient thing to do is not be efficient, but create a space in an environment where someone feels really, really held. And it shows everybody in the environment that it's okay to show up if you're kind of just learning or you don't know something yet, but you're excited to give. I think this reminds me of, I'll take a quick kind of detour here. Many years ago, when I started the yoga studios, I was really wanting to bring in more heart-centered events into the community. And I was talking with people who had great ideas around events that they would like to see. And there was so much fear and there was so much resistance. And I would see the possibility and the potential, but people would really hold themselves back. And what I learned pretty early on was that the most important way to get the full creative potential of anybody was to show them that it was okay to fail. And so what we would do is we would set up an event for them. And usually at the first time someone creates an event, they have all sorts of big fun ideas And if you've organized hundreds or thousands of events, you will see a million holes in their big, wonderful, creative ideas. And there's this like really strong need and want to go in there and be like, oh yeah, but we can't do this because it's going to create these problems, and we can't do this because it's going to do this. And you really want to just kind of clean everything up and make it perfect and make it as efficient as possible. And aside from the big ones, the ones where it's like, okay, this is going to be problematic. Um, that first event people would run, I'd really step back and really allow them just to create their vision, put it out there in the world. And in many cases, there would be problems. Either, not very many people would show up, or people would show up and they wouldn't be fully prepared. Things a lot of times would fail. And it was in that moment that I had the greatest opportunity, because then I could come in and say, okay, what do we learn from this and how do we do better next time? That moment was one of the most emotional moments that I saw in the yoga studios. And yoga studios are all about internal transformation. People come there for all sorts of emotional processing. I don't know if I've ever seen any more emotional processing than that moment, because we have such a strong culture and a belief that if I go in and fail, especially publicly, and maybe I put on this big event and now I've cost the studio a few $1,000s and I know it. And I put in all my time, I've gotten nothing out of it. They put in a bunch of time and energy and marketing and money, and they've gotten nothing out of it. Right in that moment of failure, when someone thinks that, someone's going to come up to them and be upset, and they're like, cool, how do we learn from this? What do we want to do next time? I really like this. This didn't go so well. Do you want to talk about it? Um, that's that first moment when they realize, oh, it's actually safe to fail. And then the next time, it's magical, because then they really get into their creative capacity and ability. And so empathy here is really about creating safe containers and environments. It's about creating a deeply safe container, and most importantly, creating a space where people feel really comfortable jumping in to say yes, even if it means they're going to fail, even if it means that they've never done it before, even if it means that there's going to be a big learning curve. It's really about investing in the long term and investing in the person, and acknowledging that that when people, as early as possible, feel safe to fail, you will get more out of them for years to come. And they will be able to show up in ways that you would have never expected, that they would have never expected, and the entire community wins. This also kind of leads into, so we have this aspect of being adaptable. And that's another really big difference from traditional leadership. In traditional leadership, when something new emerges, you don't want it to distract from the main goal. And so we get really used to squashing little birdies that show up, that could pull us off of the main goal. And with community building, we need to start building other skill sets of this idea that there's never going to be one process happening that everything else has to kind of pay service to. It's always going to be multiple events, multiple goals, multiple processes, always going to be a shift in priorities. And so as new ideas emerge, as new needs emerge, to stay in an open and flexible container, to be receiving that, and even looking out for that. And this can be a really big one, where, especially if we're working on an event or we're working on a goal, we put a lot of time and energy into it, we're wanting to stay focused, we're wanting to make really clear movement forward. it's very easy to kind of implement this rigid control, and it takes some time and some practice to really acknowledge, like, how to create space for flexibility. And we'll get into some of those skills in a moment. Um, it's sustainable, and what it means by sustainable is that the focus is on building long-term development, trust, and relationships over any form of kind of small gains or progress. And so the idea that when you're building that trust in solid relationships in the long term, that advantage will overtake any type of short-term gains. So it's moving towards that sustainable future. And it's fundamentally intuitive. And this is where things kind of get to be a bit ironic. And what I mean by a bit ironic is that a lot of times people who hate the idea of being in leadership, people whose just skin crawls at the idea of all of the responsibility or having to talk to so many people and be super social, people who are highly sensitive to the needs and the wants of others, and people who are highly sensitive to burning themselves out and how much energy it can take to be processing and out in the community, are often the ones that are best at these forms of community leadership. And it's really about because that intuitive and that really that space where people get so attuned to other people's needs and wants, and where they really feel like it's a lot for them because there's so much into it and they feel so much, and it can be exhausting. But that also brings with it this power of being able to really listen, really see someone else's needs, see their dreams and their visions, see ways they can support them. And so then what leadership becomes is this space of how to engage and how to listen and hold space, and then also how to retreat and how to take care of yourself and how to step back and how to have boundaries. It's about not always being all on all the time, and showing others that it's okay for them too to engage and listen, and then also to retreat and step back and have boundaries and how to communicate those boundaries and how to show up with that. And with practice, this form of leadership and community engagement becomes very sustainable and lovely, and becomes a space where people can really show up in a way that feels really good, retreat in a ways that allows them to nourish themselves and step back, and be able to get everybody involved and everybody to be essentially at the end of the day co-sharing leadership, where no one's really the leader, everyone's a leader. And some people are their form of leadership is the web in between. Some people's forms of leadership are specific projects. Some people's forms of leadership are organizing under. Organizing under is where you say, like, so one of the nonprofits that I had, we would organize teams to volunteer for other nonprofits. So that's kind of an example of organizing under. We didn't create any of the visions, we didn't create any of the projects. We were just really good at organizing other people. And we would say, we don't care what it is. If you have a need in the community and you need people to show up, we'll get a group of 5 or 6 people together and we'll show up for you. And then you tell us what you need, and then we'll all work together to make it happen for you. That's like can be a really effective way of, of a skill set in supporting where you need some organization. but you're actually not goal oriented at all. You're just service oriented. So there's this space around allowing people to settle into, what leadership works for and means for them, and allowing there to be some fluidity in that, and really encouraging yourself, encouraging others to practice those spaces of creating a safe container where people aren't being burned out, you're not burning yourself out. And I'm going to say this again because it's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, pitfalls that I've seen in community organizing, which is that in a way, community organizing is kind of like sales. And if you're wanting people in the community to be engaging, and you're wanting them to be present, and if you're wanting them to pick up responsibility from time to time, and if you're wanting them to show up over and over again, and you are just burning yourself out to make these things happen, you're going to scare them, because they're going to think that in order for me to show up, in order for me to be the person you want me to be, I'm going to need to burn myself out. And I'm going to need to be engaged all the time. I'm going to need to be on all the time. I'm going to need to be fielding conversations all the time. And I'm going to need to be, I don't have time for this. I don't have capacity for this. Or maybe even desire. And so it's really can't overdo this enough, that the more that you openly, vocally, and in a really soft, like, easy way, get your boundaries out there and let people know what you're available for, what you're not. The more you take care of yourself, the more that you show up for yourself, and the more that you put yourself in a space where when you show up into the community, you can be all on, and then you say, oh, actually now I need space for me. And the more that you create permission, the safer it's going to feel for others to step up and to join that that process. Because then they know that, oh, I too, if I start feeling like I took on too much, I too can step back a little bit. I too can say, oh, this project that we're going to get done in a month, you know what? Actually, I want to set a new goal. I want to make that a 2-month or a 3-month project, because I'm realizing that I'm not getting enough time with my kids if I try to get this project done too quickly. Or like even a simple statement like that, like reassessing goals and reassessing where things want, and putting out there where your priorities are, and saying, oh, actually this is running into another area of my life that's a big priority, and so we need to shift things around a bit. Like, even every time we do that, it gives others the permission to be able to step up and show up in ways that allow them allow them to kind of, see what works for them and engage what works for them. Now, I want to start getting to a little bit around kind of what this can look like in practice. But first, I want to just open up and see kind of like a little bit of, just kind of entering the first half hour. I want to open up if there's any questions, if there's any comments, if there's anything that has come up, and or if you're, totally lost, or, so see where we're at and get a gauge there. And so any questions out there, just feel really welcome to step in.
Colin, could we go off of the screen share? I think it would be great to see your face while we're in this portion.
Definitely, yeah. Hold on a second. Yeah,
amazing. Pip is raising a hand.
I was just going to say, for me, the thing about the vision, stop going for that vision. It's really, it just makes so much sense to me, because there's so much diversity in a neighborhood. So that was super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, And I think what I've often found is that this one can be a little bit counterintuitive in the sense that we have approached so much around this idea of a big vision. And what the shift is that I've noticed in community building is a shift from big vision to lots of small visions. So there's kind of the image sometimes people I think that are coming to mind where you have kind of a shark approaching this little fish, but then a bunch of other little fish kind of game together, and it kind of creates this, kind of image of a much bigger fish made up of all these little fishes. And that's a little bit of how I see vision.
I was thinking in a different way of like let a thousand flowers bloom.
Oh,
That
yes,
idea.
yeah. Yeah. So, but there's this space around that when you try to create, one singular vision, that there is an aspect around it's never perfect for everybody. And in community, a lot of times people can really feel there's a lot of, how do I say this? Anybody's done a lot of community building. One of the things you realize in community building is that there's a lot of hurt in people. There's a lot of spaces where people have felt small at some point in their life. There's a lot of spaces where people have felt ignored at some point in their life. There's fears that come up. There's pain. There's trauma at some points in time. People will be triggered into different aspects of trauma that's happened in their life. And so what happens sometimes when we're trying to organize people around vision, especially when it comes to community, especially when it comes to things that say impact their family, or the way they raise their kids, or how they're prioritizing their time in their life, that when we try to bring everybody in the same vision, you can run into these really strong pain points for people where you think that what you're talking about is very small, but it's actually a really big thing for that person, right? And so and that's where the big vision approach can run into some real problems, because what you might be thinking, oh, well, it's a distraction, it's very small, it's not that big of a deal. But for that person in that moment, it may mean absolutely everything. That nuance, that distinction, could literally be the word choice on a flyer. Like, I don't like that word. Like, it can be as small or as big as you could imagine. And for that person, though, it may be tapping into something that is deeply meaningful to them. And so another approach with this is that if you're allowing everybody to create smaller visions, and then as a community leader, as a leader who's kind of the web in between, you can be like, oh, okay, these 5 people have a small vision that's really similar to one another. That's a great workshop. That's a great opportunity for them to work together and to bring something together where it's like, okay, it's a little different. There's some nuances here, but so you start looking at like how to sub-organize. That's at a large level, like with communities that are, say, 25 or more, where you can really get into a lot of sub-organizing. But even relatively small, there's a space where you can say, oh, well, this maybe is a project that you take on, but also I noticed that what you're wanting to do really similar to what Joseph is wanting to do. So maybe we can, maybe you guys should talk and team up a little bit there. But there is a space around really holding a lot of compassion for allowing people to be in their vision, and then helping people understand, like, okay, there's going to be certain projects that might bring them closer to their vision that aren't their full perfect vision. That's not exactly what they want, but will bring them in the direction of that. And, and I think kind of this imperfect movement and this imperfect ways that we can show up for one another and move forward becomes really strong. And I really think, one of the most powerful things that we can bring into community building is getting rid of the ideas of perfection and allowing things to be a little bit messy and allowing things to move forward, but with just a lot of compassion and a lot of understanding that the reality is and the truth is with community building, you have more than one shot. And so you can do it and then you can kind of see what works and then do it again. And then you can kind of shift around a bit and do it again. And that is, becomes a really a strong strength once we learn how to lean into that. Yeah. And let's see, Mel, I see your hands up.
Hi, Carlen. Thanks so much for sharing with us. It's really interesting to hear like some of the conceptual and theoretical background to, I think, what everybody in this room has been doing in various different contexts for a really long time. I'm really curious about Ksenia's question or listener request from earlier around wanting to hear about more examples of some of these concepts in action. And I also am kind of just aware that we've got like multiple different pods from across the accelerator on this call at the moment too. So yeah, I'm also keen to be hearing other examples that we sort of are noticing or seeing or maybe practicing in our own context. So I don't know if you've got a few stories you can share, Carlen, or maybe others in your room. Yeah, I don't know, Ksenia, if that's what your question was going towards, but
Yeah,
very much is.
great. I mean, I think one of the things, we will that I'm hoping to get to in the space is, this is kind of we're transitioning a little bit into the practicality of this, and some in a slide or two from now, but in a moment from now, is going to go into kind of talk about some of the specific skill sets. But let me give kind of speak to what you're talking about here with examples, and there's, I think one of the biggest examples here is actually I was working with a group in, I'll keep them anonymous from now, but I was working with a group in California. It was a city, and I was consulting with them around kind of increasing climate awareness and consulting with them around how to be lowering carbon emissions, kind of building more of a kind of stronger sense of community, and how to, and what was very interesting in that space was that coming into it, they had a really strong vision. They had a really strong vision around things that they wanted to accomplish and do. And, they really wanted to, they thought that this was a very progressive area that was, relatively wealthy. And like, okay, like we can be the ones to do it, where we can step up and be the first to be a fully carbon neutral city. And we can then create this model, and then we can take that model and we can put it around the world, and we can get other cities to come in and do what we did, and we can transition our infrastructure for transportation, and we can transition our infrastructure for energy, and we can transition our infrastructure. And so they're really excited about this. And but one of the things they ran into, which is very common with these types of things, is that as they started getting out in the community, that some people in the community thought that was really fun and a really cool idea, and they thought, oh, yeah, that would be kind of cool if our little city did something that got some global recognition and got out there in the world. But a lot of people, they just didn't care. They're like, well, do I care about the environment? Yeah. Do I care if we're, people around the world look at our city and see us as some example? Not really. I mean, if anything, maybe that might bring more tourism than I really want. I kind of like this being a small, little, quiet town. And so right off the bat, like really early on, ran into this space of that and so what would end up happening is if they were doing engagement, that they realized they're kind of weeding people in or out based off of their alignment to that vision. And then it ends up losing a lot of the momentum, and a lot of people who wanted community, wanted to show up, wanted to show up in different ways, but that specific vision wasn't what it was for them. And what they transitioned to, which really was wonderful, was they would start setting up these little community gatherings where they have different stalls, and where in these little, where you'd show up, and they did it at this space where there's like a little bit of like a pub brewery space, and people would show up and get a drink and walk around, and they would allow really anybody in the community who wanted to show up and have a little booth. It was not a formal booth, kind of more of an informal booth. Some were a little bit more formal, but they let anybody kind of show up and kind of talk about what they were doing and help people. And they just help navigate, and they just help people find something in their community that was fun for them to engage with. And so it was a big shift from like this bigger vision of, oh, this is what we're all going to do together, to let's just get people in a space where they're making friends, they're meeting new people, and and they're finding something for themselves that they can move forward with. And we, interestingly enough, when I did about 8 years of research in civic participation, looking at what gets people to actually step up in their community and do something versus just kind of have an idea and put it off or not care. And the number one thing that gets people engaged in their community is that they feel disconnected from their neighbors, like they don't know their neighbors, or because they just want to meet new people. They just want to meet new friends, and maybe make an acquaintance, or somebody that they can their kids can play with, or so it comes down to social environments. And what ends up happening is that once that container is created, you can direct that container really easily. So if you create a container around showing up and doing something in the community, and you build friendships around that, and you build community around that, and then you can say, oh, well, there's this need. People are pretty adaptable. Like, oh, if there's a need and I can help and support, and I'm kind of used to jumping up and helping and supporting, sure, why not? But if they're not used to helping and supporting, and if they're not used to engaging their community, then it's just not on their radar, and they're just not paying attention. And so bringing people in is finding something that really works for them, something that's fun for them, a way to kind of a light way to engage. And then once that culture's set, then it's easier to direct into other spaces. I saw you put your hand up.
I couldn't figure out how to do it. There's like some digital cute way to do it. I'm just doing it old school.
Yeah.
What I'm sort of gathering, and forgive me for like being slow with this. So what I'm hearing mostly is that vision, big picture maybe is important, but like the amount of work that you need to put into community building before you can achieve any like specific vision. Like we're talking about like really thinking about our goals here, and it's like if my vision is like I want to get my neighbors together to build like a neighborhood playground, like in order to do that I might have to spend like 2-3 years just like getting to know my neighbors essentially, and getting sort of trust, and then maybe like a smaller group can coalesce. But up until then it needs to be open-ended. Like I feel like I'm rambling at you, and I'm really trying to cohesively say something here. Like we're talking about like emergent versus directed goals.
Yeah.
And it feels like a lot of like of the neighborhood accelerator stuff is more allowing for emergence in a lot of ways without being like super directed. So I don't know, like I'm just trying to like figure out what that distinction is, because it's very interesting, because like even like the green energy, like there's definitely things where I can see my neighbors could have like opinions about, and things that I can see the neighborhood kind of coming together around. But it sounds like from your work and practical examples and research that it's like you almost can't do like the community building. We've talked about this before, how community building is just like super, super slow. Forgive the children screaming in the background.
Yeah. Oh, no, no. So I love this, and I love the example. We've definitely created some community gardens. I've worked on projects where we've, brought these types of things into community, or whether it's a playground space, whether it's transforming, kind of like a old, ugly, kind of dilapidated area into something beautiful where community can be engaging with or not. What I would say is that the seed can be a bit relative. In some places, there are reasons why things go slowly, and there's a need for that, and that are unknown coming into it. Sometimes you have, certain barriers to really getting a project off the ground quickly that in order that just kind of demands us to slow down. And in some cases, when you actually start going a bit slower at first, the project actually comes together faster. There's a, there's, so there's a term out there, is a phrase where it's, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, which is kind of, it's this contradiction space. Where there's a space where that sometimes when we try to go too fast, the project actually ends up taking longer because we end up having to kind of backtrack a little bit. But what I will say is that it's not saying that we can't have a big vision and that we can't have something moving forward. What it's working with is this idea of saying that I want to have a community where my visions and your visions can become a reality. And so if my goal is to have, say, a community garden, then what I want to do is I want to engage my community, see who also is really into that idea, and then as other ideas, as other things come into the fold, to be encouraging and providing skill. Yes, thank you for correcting that one for me. Slow, smooth, smooth as fast as is well. But as we start, and this is where there's a space of learning to allow it to be a yes and. So there's this aspect of how do we see and meet people's needs and say, okay, how do we get you started on your vision while also still supporting this one if you want to, and allowing there to be multiple tracks at once on some level. And there's this, and this is, which is kind of what's one thing that's kind of interesting is that a lot of people really still like to follow and just be told what to do and to still be given a container where they can just do something. And so this is not going to be every single person in the community is going to, kind of always need to go off one direction or want something totally different. Creating and building structure and walking people through that and showing people how they can show up for you and showing people how they can show up for a project and how that can lead towards something still holds a lot of value. And it's not always one or the other approach. And this is what this aspect around, it's just allowing that aspect to be a little bit fluid and allowing there to be a space where, where people can feel like, okay, I can put in my 2 cents, may or may not be fully adopted, but I can also create something for myself and feel supported in that if I want to create a different project or if I want to, kind of move off in a different direction. Now, my only hesitancy in here is if there are competing ideas for the same piece of land. That is an area where that does create a space where you do need to really work on aligning on some degree of collective vision, and there's really beautiful processes that can go through with that. But if you're not in the competition space of that, and it's just around getting people excited and just around getting people to be participating and putting in the energy or the money or the resources or showing up, that it's still fine to have directed leadership in that space and to have somebody at the helm that's being like, hey, this is what we need to do. And then, and there is a degree of fluidity between the two types of leadership. And this is kind of, one of the aspects of kind of this yin and yang, where both are valuable. A great example of this is for bigger projects, you're going to have budgets, right? And it's really good to have there be somebody who has some degree of understanding of math and accounting managing the budget that's very, very practical. And that's like, okay, great, love all the visions. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. These are our constraints. So it's not about dropping that part. It's not about saying that we can't have clear vision and direction. It's more about acknowledging that, especially in community engagement, early community engagement is different than later community engagement. Because in early community engagement, you kind of have to find a way to help people get used to things. Like I've noticed a couple of people here, right now I'm doing a lot of work with Rotary. Rotary is a great example of like late stage community engagement, where still about 20% of the people in Rotary, maybe even less, do most 80% of the work. You still have a few people kind of really, but there is a space where there's a number of things that somebody in Rotary can step into, and then bring on people that are just used to helping out. And versus when you're just getting a project started, and there can be a little bit more work to start and build that culture of jumping in and supporting and being present. Savannah?
Hi.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everything you're saying, and I want to ask a question that I know if Kirsten was here, she would ask, and maybe Nate has a similar question, or it's just like this is up for him too.
Yeah.
But there's people in NAP in this program who are leaders of those late stage community efforts like Rotary, where they, last week I was at Kirsten's Coronado Neighborhood Association meeting in Phoenix, and her president of the association were giving like a talk about all the updates and da-da-da-da, and they were doing an amazing job. And I remember just thinking like, and this isn't a criticism at all of them, but I was just like, oh, asking people, encouraging people to get involved can land like nagging.
Mm-hmm.
And so what would you say to folks who feel like they have to nag their community to get involved in those late stage community efforts where there's an established institution that has already been providing so much service and wants to transition into more of a community-led effort?
What I would say to this, and again, we work with organizations like this a lot, is that sometimes we have to go back to how we got to where we are. And so Rotary and these other bigger organizations, they all started somewhere as well. And when they started, it looked really different than it looks right now. And so with community engagement, what it looks like to bring somebody into a culture of engaging is really different than what it looks like to bring somebody who is actively engaging their community into your project. And so I think one of the things for me when engaging and bringing someone into a project, the first step of listening is this brand new for you, or do you do this all the time? And so if I'm talking to somebody who's, been like high in Rotary for a really long period of time and I'm working on a project, I will just tell them my project needs. I will just say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is the capacity that I would like you to support me in. Is this something that you can be excited about? Is this something that you have time and capacity for? Is there something that I can support you in return? That would then, is there a way that we can collaborate? Is there a project maybe you're already working on that's kind of similar to this that we can collaborate on? Like I can just get right into that. If I'm talking to somebody, say at a farmer's market, and they overhear me saying something and that kind of piques their interest, I'm not going to start there at all. And so because there's an understanding that people aren't always in that position where they've built that orientation yet. And so what I've found to be the most effective tool for this is to create environments where people are getting to meet each other, and to create spaces in the beginning where people can talk about what they're seeing in the community and what they want changed. So this actually comes out of South America. There was Pablo Freire created a concept called contentization. And we tested this in a research lab over a course of 2-3 years. And it was a very simple concept. He said, if you get people just talking about the problems in their community for a long enough period of time, at a certain point in time, they realize that they know more than the average person about those problems. And that itself creates the impetus to want to be like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I can be a part of this change. And we tested this with random people out of the community. We would bring together random people out of the community, and we would say, we would just, with very little direction, we just get people talking about the issues and the wants, and for them kind of strategizing and coming up with their own needs, and just looking into like, what do we like, what do we don't like. We just get them talking about the community. And what ends up happening is, after we found that it takes about 8 meetings, and after about 8 times, about 6 to 8 times of people coming together and talking, that they start to, and I've literally been in a focus group where someone says, wait a minute, we've been talking about this for 6 weeks now. We probably know more about this issue than anybody else in our community. Maybe we should be the ones to try to, create a solution for it. And what's interesting is that it's at that vantage point, when people start to have kind of self-selected that they want to be a part of and change things, at that vantage point, it's much easier to recruit them into current projects that are already running than at the vantage point beforehand. And this is where there can often be, I've seen a lot of problems with established organizations and new people, is that the established organizations are like, oh, but we've already been through this process. And so they don't create a lot of space for the new people to come in just thinking through and just coming up with lots of ideas and just challenging everything. Because they're like, oh, we already did that. And oh, and this is what, and every new idea that comes in, like, oh yeah, but that doesn't work because of this. Oh, that doesn't work because of this. But they're not giving space, they're not giving the emotional space for that person to go through that process themselves. And so that would be my biggest areas of advice, is that you need to give people the emotional room to go through the process that you went through and that others went through, where you're just throwing out ideas, and just understand and respect that they will shut down their own ideas as they think deeper into it. And the biggest thing you can do is just encourage people to think deeper and deeper into the problem, There's a process called 5 whys, which is really good at this, where you say, you put out a problem, you say, well, why does this problem exist? You go into and then you look at that why and you're like, okay, well, why does that exist? And you go into the next why and you say, well, why does that exist? And it kind of just brings you down this rabbit hole. But ultimately, I think that the best thing to do is to create space where people are just talking with the community, and create space where people are just, and then once they've gotten to the point where they're self-identifying, oh, I can be a part of the change, that's the moment to recruit. That's the moment where they're ready to take on new things, they're ready to join teams, they're ready to show up in ways. That's the moment where they want to transition all the talking into action. There's another psychology aspect to this. One of the things you'll notice online a lot is something called long-form sales psychology. And in long-form sales psychology, they get you to invest as much time as possible before presenting you with the product or the sale. So it's like they have really something that just kind of pulls you in, where you like read more and more, or a video where they keep on teasing what they're going to sell you, but then they like take a tangent and they make you listen for another 2 minutes, and then another 2 minutes. Then the next thing you know, you've been listening to this video for a half an hour before they finally make you the sale. What happens in this is that when we put time and energy in something, we don't want to feel like that time and energy is wasted. And so we're more likely to make investment in something that we've previously put time and energy into than something that has happened quickly. And so when we're engaging in the community and we're trying to get people to make quick decisions because we don't have very much time, what we end up doing is taking away the opportunity for them to go through a slower process that actually orients them to be ready to say yes. And so I think that, one of the most important things is to create, I think, dual strategies for community engagement. How we engage people who are already engaged, and then how we re-engage or engage people who've never been engaged before. And that second part needs to be a lot slower and provide a lot of space for people to just be in the exploration world until they somewhat self-identify as being ready to participate. Yeah, Shani?
I suppose I want to just make a little bit of a play for the more traditional leadership style in
Please.
certain situations. So if there's a fire, we listen closely to the fireman and everyone does what he says.
Yes.
So if there's some sort of emergency or some sort of need for that leadership style, then you move to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suppose maybe the thing for me, and I'd be interested in your opinion about this, is to be able to have a fluid leadership style that is reflective of the needs of what's going on at the time.
Yeah. Two parts to this. One is that, and this is kind of where why I started things off by saying context is so important, because what is really beneficial in one context can be really not beneficial in another. Fire is a great example of this. If there's a fire, the last thing you want is a bunch of people standing around arguing over like the approach to take when you have a fireman who's put their whole life into it and they're like, actually, I know the approach to take, this is what we need to do. So contextual awareness is really important here. Now, knowing how to navigate this can be interesting, in the sense that sometimes it's really clear which one's going to be more beneficial, and sometimes it's not so clear. And so I think, obviously, and sometimes it's oddly not so clear. I'll give a really great example of this. Community policing, right? So community policing is a really good example of the kind of gray area here, where they found that in many communities, reduction of crime comes from ignoring a lot of small crimes, building trust, and bringing the community on to do some self-policing, and then, you know, in creating a space where it's really kind of more for the more dangerous crimes that come in, where, you know, where you want to bring, you know, where the police are stepping up more. So that's an area where for a very long time we're like, oh, safety and protection, that's the police. And then, you know, and then at a certain point that was challenged a little bit, and it's like, actually, well, there's some nuances to this, and that actually creates some problems if there's not some fluidity here. So I think that, yeah, it's not about demonizing. It's not about, you know, I think what it's looking at is some of the criteria that I use around the differences here are how many people really need to be involved, and whether or not there is capacity for a need to be met by a small group of really organized people. And if so, then a lot of times the directed leadership strategy can be faster and more efficient and stronger. So, you know, so things where, you know, things where you can have small groups of people, especially if it can be like, you know, where it's like, okay, this can be our, you know, volunteer fire department, where people are going to be specialized, they're going to be trained, they're going to know what they're doing, and we're all going to trust them. You know, is going to be, that's a very effective strategy at community safety. Other areas where we kind of need to be more, and even, you know, someone had mentioned earlier, like, you know, doing like a community garden or, you know, community play park, things like that. Even those can at a certain point in time, at a certain stage in the process, can often transition into a directed leadership approach as well. And so even in a singular project, you may start out in kind of more of a kind of a yin approach. And then at a certain stage of that project, the whole community might say, okay, well, we've kind of put in our time. Now we wanted to step back and watch things happen. And, you know, we feel like we've been heard. We've had our 2 cents out there. And then you can have like a small group of people come in and really kind of transition into a more directed leadership space, and then make it happen. So it can even in one project can fluidly go between one and the other at different times.
And I'd argue even the other way. So the fire might have happened, and then we need to move to the more yin style as we go into resilience building afterwards, especially resilience building afterwards, and recovery and all those sorts of things.
Absolutely. You know, I think, and this is again where I think one of the biggest things that we can do as community leaders is learn to slow down, step back, talk to some people, and listen. And I found that when people start feeling agitated, and they start feeling like we're putting a bunch of time in here, but our wheels are spinning, and we really want to see more direction, we really want to see more movement, and we all kind of know what needs to get done, but it's not happening, that's a really great moment to transition more into directed leadership and to set up some structure for that. When people start feeling, wow, I might as well not even speak into the room because I'm not going to be heard, and I feel like I'm just getting pulled along and things are happening, but no one even knows why it's happening. And if people just start feeling like they're not being heard and listened to, that's often when you need to go back the other direction and move away from directed leadership a little bit and move more into something that is that's softer and listening and so there's little subtle things we can pay attention to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Savannah.
Thank you so much for this, Carlen. I'm learning a lot on like a lot of levels of and applications of leadership.
I think she froze for a second. Okay. Kayla, are you speaking? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I said yes. Savannah has frozen, so let's see if we can take another question or comment until she comes back.
Just want to make a little plug, if I could, for a facilitation tool called Open Space. It's the ultimate of this, in that even as the facilitator, you have no idea of the agenda, you have no idea of the time, you don't even have an idea who's going to turn up. You just have a juicy question that people come to. And sometimes those groups move into something and become a more directed leadership. Hey, we want to do this. Let's kind of, it's time to get on with it. We all agree with each other. Anyway, I just love it.
Yeah, open space is great. There's a number of tools that are out there. You know, one of the things that there's a few things that, you know, there's different tools for community facilitation, open space being one of them. There's different approaches that people take. I think when it comes into
Tell me. Another one.
I would say that some of the, you know, just kind of reading some of my notes we didn't get to, but like, I think some of the really like the basic nonviolent communication skills, it can be really effective to kind of be brushing up on that space. Another one that I've worked with a lot is called limiting beliefs. There's a really good section in this in the Empowerment Institute. There's a book called Empowerment. I can put in the channel that by David Gershon and Gil Straub, that goes into limiting beliefs. There's a whole process around, because this happens a lot in community building, where people just feel like something's impossible. And so, you know, developing some processes around in a culture where we're exploring why that's coming up for us and how to work past our limiting beliefs, I find to be, really, empowering tool there. I think, and anything that we can do to be normalizing is really powerful too. I normalize feeling stuck and running into and feeling like something's impossible, and then working past it. And because there's this space where a lot of people, when they kind of hit that wall and they feel stuck, that's the stopping point for them. Where anybody who's done a lot of community work knows that that comes and goes on a regular basis, sometimes several times in a day, where you kind of feel stuck and you don't know what you're going to do, and then you realize that you kind of engage these more creative processes and work through it, and discover actually there's maybe some nuances or an approach or direction that never would have thought of before. And so I think that there's a space where, and then, the other part is that in this space, so we're trying to talk about soft leadership space, getting into the habit of finding time. And I would schedule it in, like literally just scheduling in time as a community leader to just checking in with people and just listening, and not having any real agenda for it, not having any real want or need from the conversation, and making sure that we are scheduling in and creating time, probably more than we think we should, just checking in with people and listening to them. And maybe you talk about the project the whole time. Maybe the person just talks about some challenge they're facing the whole time. But really creating space for that, and encouraging not just you as a leader, but encouraging everyone to do that for each other. if you try to be the one who does that as a leader for everything, then you're just not going to have enough time in the day, and everyone's going to wonder like, well, why did this person get like Kayla's time, but I didn't get Kayla's time? Like it can become a problem. But it's really just about creating space for a culture where we're all just taking time to check in with one another. It can also be a really big tool for this. Yeah. Shani?
I just wanted, I suppose, to point out that in the NAP, this happens quite naturally because the events we organize, different people come to. And so sometimes there might be 2 or 3 people, they're social. So there's no necessarily, this is the vision, this is whatever's happening. They connect with each other. Then you might connect with someone over here, and then there's an event that's run and you're not even there. And so that process that we're using allows that to happen quite naturally.
Yeah. It's one of the strengths in these types of processes is that, you know, these structures allow for a lot of the work like that to get done in spaces where without that space and that container, it can often get missed. Yeah. And Pip?
I just had this question about, you know, I really resonate with people coming along to a meeting and saying, well, let's do this and let's do that. And you think, well, like we'd love to paint the water towers, but Coburn said no. You know what I mean? Like some issues have been, you know, examined, and this is where they sit. But in my day job, because I work as a health advocate and I sit on lots of consultations, I get annoyed if I'm not properly briefed on what are the issues. So is there a space somewhere in there that's not about limiting beliefs, but it's just saying these are some of the parameters and this is some of the history, so that together we're thinking about, so it still retains that idea of new ideas and all that, but it's, you just, I don't know, like, is there a space for that, or is that limiting?
Yeah. I would say that this comes into like gauging a readiness to engage from each person. So if you're coming fresh, and some people want to come in, they have very little time, they want to be a good person, they literally just want to come in, be told what to do, and do the thing. And you'll find people in the community, and they're great. They're like, yeah, I know I support the larger issue. I'm going to show up. Tell me to put chairs that are over here, over there. Tell me to bring this in. Tell me to go pick up some drinks and bring it to the event. You know, tell me to call my congressperson. Like, there's a pretty large group of people who are really just saying, direct me. And when you find them, hold on to them, care for them. Don't ask too much, but continue to ask them. They're wonderful people. You have others that are far enough along in the process and have felt heard in enough context that they feel okay both taking the lead and being the leader at different times. Those are people that, you know, have done a bit of community engagement work already, and they can also be kind of directed a bit more, and sometimes are looking for that direction. But there's a huge part of the community, and I would say a very large portion of the community that gets missed, where they just need that initial period of time where it can be a bit more fluid for them and it's not quite working indirectly yet. And I think that and what I usually do is create spaces like what NAP is creating, or others where people are coming together, where they're just talking and where they're just getting ideas out there, and to be really kind of careful not to shut down the ideas, even, you know, like as much as possible, creating space where they discover why their idea wasn't a good idea, you know, through things like questions, through having 2 people who don't know what they're talking about talk back and forth to one another, like as much as possible, like remove yourself as the expert as much as possible until they're ready to engage. And what happens is that once somebody has self-identified as being ready to engage, that is when they're going to be open to direction and feedback, and direction will actually feel really good. But if it comes in too soon, direction doesn't feel too good, it feels limiting, or it just kind of feels like, you know what you're doing, I'm lost. And then therefore, what ends up happening is people feel like they can't bring value. You know, if they're coming in and everyone kind of feels like they're like a professional and they know what they're doing, and then I'm just kind of brand new and I'm just kind of sitting here, that they don't feel needed and wanted in the same way. Where if people come into a space and it actually feels a bit more loose and more open at first, a lot of people are like, oh, we're figuring this out together. And then I can bring my skills in and you can bring your skills in. And then once they're ready for it, then bring in the structure. And I found that approach to be much more effective. Again, the thing to watch out for, and the greatest part about them, is that they usually self-identify. 90% of the time they will self-identify. The thing to watch out for are for the people who don't even want to know why and literally just want to be told what to do. And so if you're doing a community engagement event and someone comes up to you and they're like, just give me something to do, listen to them and give them something to do. And, you know, because there are some people who will self-identify that don't want to be in the wishy-washy space at all, and who want to just be given direction. And it's good to have, it's good to step in and support that. But my assumption with a community, any new community engagement member, that is to bring them into a space where they feel that it hasn't all been figured out yet, and that their nuances and their experiences matter much more than their skills. Much more than their skills. You want people in a community to feel like their experience in the community, their experience with their family, their experience with their kids, their work, their experience matters, and that the core need of how they show up and who they are matters. And have that, hold space for that for a little while until they're ready for more engagement. Yeah.
That last point hits so hard. It's like, literally, don't be a perfectionist, because if it's perfect, then no one else can like contribute to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's this space around, I think what more than what you just said, what I heard was the emotion there. And I think that's the point of this space around, and I know a little bit because we've talked a little bit, but that, you know, a lot of times we really feel like we need to take on too much, and we really feel like we need to just create this perfect infrastructure around everything, and then people will feel safe and they'll show up and do the things, and it can really exhaust us. And I know people are signing off here. It's been a long meeting. We'll close in just a second. I'll close after these remarks. That what ends up happening is that we just burn out. And if we're going to burn out, guess what? That means others are going to burn out too.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really about how we take the long game and take care of ourselves and show others they can take care of themselves, and acknowledge that it's a bit of a dance moving forward in the community. There's some steps forward, there's a few steps back, there's a couple of steps to the side, there's a pause, there's a twirl and a spin, another few steps forward. And the more we can get used to that dance and let other people know that that's what's going to happen and create a culture where that's okay, the easier it all becomes for everybody. And the goal is just to be a big group of friends that are supporting each other and from time to time doing some really cool community things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I guess
Let's give it up for Carlen.
Close with
Give it
that.
up
Thank
for
you.
Carlen. Here's some snaps.
Oh, woo, 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 woo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining
Thank you.
us.